Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod. We're getting started just a little bit late here this morning. My apologies. But oh my gosh, am I glad to be here with you guys. Glad to be here with you live. Glad to be feeling well enough. I know I still sound very nasally, but I feel well enough to be here, and that is, yay, miraculous. I am Shannon Penrod. I'm a proud pony, parent of a neurodiverse individual, and thrilled to be here with you guys. We are going to be live with you for the next hour. We will go the full hour, and I hope that you will be writing in during this hour. You know, on Mondays now we do the parent-to-parent talks where I just talk with you guys, and you know that I love your comments. We're live right now on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And later we will podcast to a bunch of different places. And in a second, our dear fabulous Traven will show you some of the different ways that you can be downloading the podcast. You can always watch our archives of shows on our YouTube channel. And we have 12 years now of videos that are there on the YouTube channel. We started recently over the summer when we podcast, we're only putting out the audio podcast. And you guys have overwhelmingly said that you prefer that because it used to be that you had to choose, do you want the video, do you want the audio? And I'm just gonna be frank with you, it was really expensive for us to podcast the video. But you guys are loving just having the audio podcast and using YouTube when you want to watch picture and sound. When you need to see how crazy my hair looks, that's when you would go to YouTube. Anything else, if you just want to hear my nasal, sinusy voice, then you can download and take us with you anywhere you want to go. So thrilled to be here with you guys. I just got back yesterday from being away. I flew to Seattle so that I could participate in the WABA conference there, the Washington ABA conference. I want to thank everybody that I met there. Oh my gosh. It was just so amazing to meet so many people who care so deeply about our community. You know what I always say to you guys, you know, si se puede, we get there, we hold hands, we get there together. But I always love it when I meet professionals who are just so driven to be able to help us, to be able to help individuals on the spectrum. Excuse me, it just fills me up, lights me up. And one of the things that I was talking about when I was there is how important intensity is. I learned so much this weekend from so many of the other speakers, things that I want to be, and you know, folding into what we talk about here. But one of the things that I learned from me sharing and talking is that intensity means different things to different people. Now, we already had it scheduled for us to be talking about intensity here today. So I was kind of glad because when people were saying, okay, you talked about intensity, but what do you mean when you're saying intensity, Shannon? I was like, isn't it ironic that I am doing a whole talk about this on Monday? So if there's anybody watching from the WABA conference, by the way, we love it when you guys write in. You're very quiet on the chat this morning, but we love it when you write in and say where you're watching from and interact, because we super duper love that. I do. I super duper love that. So anyway, I also want to say too that if you have the opportunity, I think it's a really great thing to do to subscribe to our YouTube channel. There was a period of time where every time we posted a video, you got a notification that we posted a video, but that has changed a little bit now, and so there is a way you won't get as inundated because we post a lot of videos. And you know, if you know where the YouTube channel is, you just need an occasional thing so that you can go and see. Anna went to the TACA conference this weekend. How was it, Anna? Did you learn so much? I'm chartreuse with envy because I couldn't split and be in two places at the same time. But that's a good time. And did you attend in person, Anna? Because, I mean, that's like find your tribe city, right? And if you have a second, write in and tell us one big takeaway, like the thing that you learned that blew your mind. I love at the TACA conference, there's always something that you go, I didn't know that. I did not know that. But then I love that before you leave the conference, and it was the same way at the WABA conference, I have to say. Hey, May, watching from Rhode Island. TACA was the first conference that I ever went to that they said, hey, we're not letting you leave without setting an action plan. Like, what's the takeaway? What's the thing that, you know, the one action that you're going to do? So, oh, and it was your first conference ever. and you wrote special need trust. Was that your particular thing that made you go poof and your head exploded and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a whole thing I never thought of before? That's kind of cool that a TACA conference was your first conference ever. Good on you, Anna. I hope you had a really good time, and I hope you connected with people, because there are some amazing, it's a tribe. It's a tribe, boy, and they are tribe strong over at TACA, right? It's a good time. All right, well, I want to hear more about that, Anna, as we do the show. But we are going to share a little bit about intensity here in a second. I want to go over a couple of things, though. I love to hear your comments. You can comment as I'm going. Sometimes I get so focused that I take questions later. That's the old college professor in me, that I would always say to my students, I'm going to do my presentation, and then you ask questions later. But I try to notice when you guys ask things when I'm in the moment of it. I do try. I want to give the disclaimer, though, that these are parent-to-parent talks. We welcome everyone here. The mission of Autism Live is to provide information and inspiration to that larger autism community. And when I talk about the autism community, I always say it starts, the beating heart of that community are individuals who are on the spectrum themselves, of course, right? But I include in that community everyone who loves those individuals, who wants to be an ally to those individuals, because I think in that bigger community, we can affect real change. It means a lot of listening, yeah? And I'm not always good at listening, and I have to own up to that and try to be a better listener and to be a better ally. Every day, my son teaches me about, for him, you know, and it's different for everybody, but how to be a better ally. And I'm learning, I'm working on it, but I'm not a perfect person. Anitha says, I am Anita, a special ed from Bangalore, India. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to know, I have a 4-year-old little one in my class who laughs continuously without reason out of the blue. And why is that? Well, it could be a lot of different things, Anita. There could be a lot of different things going on, but certainly one of the first things that, if TACA were here, TACA would encourage you to look at, does this child appear to have a yeast overgrowth? And we all have yeast in our bodies. Yeast is it's the same, you know, I mean, yeast comes in all different forms, but if you think about when you're baking bread, and many of you decided for the first time to bake bread during the pandemic, right? And you get the little packet of yeast and you have to put it in warm water and then it grows, right? And then you add flour and sugar to it and it grows more. And if you put it in a warm place, it's going to grow a whole bunch, and then you can punch it down, but then it grows more. It's encouraged to grow more because, you know, you like challenged it and it went, oh, I'm going to grow more. Well, we all have a measure of yeast in our body. That's an important, we're not trying to eliminate yeast from our bodies, but it's very easy in today's, you know, the way we eat, today's culture, the way we put food into our mouth, the way we produce food, to get a yeast overgrowth. And this can be people on the spectrum, this can be children, this can be adults, this can, you know, and I know people go, oh, are we talking about a yeast infection like in your vajayjay? And that goes, you know, to some degree, it's all part of the same yeast, right? And women who constantly have those yeast infections often find that they need to change their diet and balance out their yeast. And when you have a yeast overgrowth, it is, you know, yeast is fed by sugar, and yeast is in things like fermented drinks, like beer and things like that. So for a child, it can have close to an opiate effect. My son had a yeast overgrowth, and I didn't understand what that was. I'd never heard of that. I didn't know. And I was like, he doesn't have a vajayjay. What are we talking about here, right? I had no idea. And a midwife explained it to me, actually, and she was like, oh, yeah, if you smell your kid's head, and she had smelled my kid's head, and his head, when he would sweat, it was like walking by a bakery, that wonderful yeasty smell. And I always used to tease him when we would, you know, take off his shoes and socks, and his feet would be all sweaty when we had gone to the park or something. And I would say, oh, smell the yeasty muffins, when he was a baby. And I would put his foot up against my nose and I would go, oh, smell that, because it smelled great. It didn't smell like stinky feet. It smelled like yeast. It smelled like fresh bread baking. And eventually the yeast overgrowth got so much that his breath smelled like brandy. And my kid, we called him the drunk elf because he would just laugh. He would laugh so hard he would tip over. And it was because the yeast overgrowth was manifesting in him almost like being drunk. And if you think about it, if you were trying to learn a new language, which for kids, when they're learning language at all, it is a new language for them, right? And if you were trying to learn a language while you were constantly drunk, I mean, go watch Drunk History and take people who are reasonable and who've studied history, and then they give them alcohol and then they try to explain the history to you. And it's hilarious, but it's not good, and you wouldn't learn anything. So there are yeast protocols that are out there, and I would caution you to use doctors when you use them. But I would have a look at this little's diet and see how much sugar are they having, how much yeast and things that you put into yeast to make it grow. And sometimes what you need to do is pull back on all that stuff. They will have a rebound when you first take those things out of their diet, because just like when you punch the yeast down, it comes back up. Yeast is a living organism. It will fight to live. It will fight for dominance. And so first the kids will all of a sudden act extra drunk, and then they will go through a period of a little bit of withdrawal, and it's like headaches and you feel achy. It feels a little bit like the flu. So be kind, be gentle if you're doing a yeast protocol, but check with a doctor and take a look. There are tests that they can do to see, I think it's the OAT, the organic acid test, to see, I think, don't quote me, ask Taka. You can all go to tacanow.org. You can join for a small yearly membership. I think it's like around $26. And then you can have access to a Taka mentor who could walk you through some of this. If you just put in yeast overgrowth into the internet, you will get a plethora. And then if you put in yeast overgrowth autism, you will find some of the different protocols. But be gentle, be careful. It is always important to be careful that you don't send a child into ketosis. And you can tell when they go into ketosis because all of a sudden their breath smells rancid. Instead of smelling sweet and like brandy, it will smell rancid. And what that means is that your child isn't getting enough carbs at this point. So you got to be a little bit careful. There's a great book, I think it's called Breaking the Vicious Cycle. And it's about the specific carbohydrate diet, and that was one of the things that we did. But we also worked very closely with a doctor, and we eventually, my son did some medicine 2 different times to help to break the yeast, but it was very doctor supervised. So I want to caution you, but that could be one reason why he's laughing hysterically. He could also be laughing hysterically because he's bored and there's something that's happening inner that he's, visiting someplace in his mind that's hilarious. I don't know if you've ever done that, where you've been someplace where you're waiting in line and you start to think of something and it's so hilarious that you can't stop laughing. I've done that. So I would look at his diet. I would smell his head. I would smell his feet, smell his breath, see if you see other signs. I would check to make sure that he's not super bored and see like what is engaging to him. Like what could you possibly do with him to keep his focus? And it might mean a little bit more one-on-one. We don't ever want to make it sound like laughing is not a good thing, right? But if it's all you can do, if you're laughing and you have no control over it, then it's harder to learn. And that is the truth of that. Okay. So thank you for Anita for writing in, and thank you for being a special ed person in Bangalore, India. We love that. Okay. So I think I gave the disclaimer and said that this is parent to parent. This is my view of intensity. This is not coming, I'm not an autism expert. I'm not even pretending to be an autism expert. I'm a mom. My son went through 5 years of what would be considered intensive ABA, and that has made all the difference for us. And I feel that it's important that I give you as parents the information that of what this should look like and why. Because if nobody tells you, how could you possibly know? I see that Anna has written in, and said, I learned so much at the TACA conference. I was a bit overwhelmed since it was my first TACA anything, but diet was a huge thing, like you were mentioning. The takeaway for me was how there are options out there for your children. Communication does not have to be spoken only. Yes, amen. The overall attitude of presumed competence for all of our children. Yes, we have to presume competence. Finding support, I was hoping to find. Sometimes our nuclear families want to help but don't know how or understand how, but meeting others who have struggled as you have helps give you hope. Amen to that, Anna. I'm so glad you went. You know, can you just give yourself a pat on the back, because that's so hard. When my little was little, I heard about the TACA conferences, but I couldn't go. I couldn't get it together because who was going to be with him? I couldn't get myself there. It took me many years before I could get to a TACA conference. And then it was like, oh, this was available to me the whole time. But it can be really hard. So you have to pat yourself on the back that you figured out how to get yourself there on behalf of your family. For you, your child, and everybody else. Good on you. I'm so glad you went. And I love, you know, the whole idea of presumed competence. Check out some of the shows that we've done here. There are many people who have adult children that weren't speaking, and that even they tried to teach them how functional communication with an AUG device, and the challenges were so big that it wasn't happening. And I'm thinking of the Carly Fleischmans of the world, the Emily Grodins of the world, but then later on it all coalesces for them. And Carly Fleischman eventually, when she was 13, took a computer. They felt that she didn't even know what the alphabet was, and they had tried, but it wasn't, you know, nothing was sticking. But then when she was 13, took the computer from a caregiver and said, "My teeth hurt, help," typed it. And they didn't know she even knew the word teeth, what it meant or how to spell it or whatever. And then, you know, now Carly is amazing. Look her up. Watch her interview with Channing Tatum, and it'll blow your mind. And of course, Emily Grodin, who wasn't speaking, and then at 25, 26, started writing, and is just an amazing, amazing advocate for herself and for other people now. So truly amazing. We always have to presume competence. And so often people think if you can't speak, you have nothing to say. And we know that that is just not true, right? And that there are other ways of communicating. In fact, most communication is not vocal. They estimate that around between 11 and 18% of communication is vocal, and the rest of it is gesture and facial expression and, you know, body, how you move your body. That's how we really communicate. But we all like the spoken thing, right? It's fast, even if it's not always efficient. Okay, so we're going to talk about intensity today, and that might bring up feelings. And some of you are going to feel like, oh, shoot, I didn't know this and I missed the boat. I'm going to say to you that I want you to forgive yourself for ever thinking that you did anything wrong. That's Ileana Van Zandt says that. She says, put your hands on your head and say, I forgive myself for ever thinking that I did anything wrong. You only know what you know on the day that you know, and what you didn't know, you got to put it over there. You didn't know. But if we have the opportunity to share with you something today, then you have a choice about what do you want to do with that information. Now, if you have a kiddo that's older, it's going to be more poignant, right? Because you're going to feel like you missed a window. I want to tell you that I've watched parents that have said, I missed that window, and then sunk into a depression and spent 5 years there, and then woke up and said, oh, now I missed another window. Right? And then they sink into another depression and they keep going that way. I've seen other parents do the opposite and say, dang it, I missed a window. How can I make up ground from what I missed and never miss another window again? And not that they don't have those feelings of depression and anger and all the other things about why didn't I know this sooner? They have those feelings too, but they kept moving. They have a better outcome, as you can imagine. So if you feel that coming, don't negate it. I don't want you to push it to the side. I want you to say, yes, that's valid. I feel this, but what can I do today? So let's start with this thought about when any of us have our child diagnosed with autism, at some point somebody's going to say something to us about 40 hours. And what do we reply? We always reply. I mean, I certainly did. I said 40 hours of therapy for a 3-year-old? That's way too much. Are you out of, that's a full-time job. Are you out of your minds? It's just too much. But my question to all of us is, well, is it? What we're coming to the table with is a different set of ideas from the past. And the past said, you know, I don't know for you, I don't want to presume for you, but the past for me, when I had my child, I wasn't a mom. I didn't want to put my child in daycare all the time. I wanted to be home with my child. And I had this picture in my head that he was going to be this pudgy little elf, and we were going to run through tall grass, and we were going to chase butterflies, and we were going to experience the discovery of the world together, he and I, while sitting in tall grass blowing bubbles. That's what I thought that it was going to be. Now, other moms that I knew that were, you know, having their kids thought, well, we're going to do a little bit of that, but we're going to take our kids to daycare, and at daycare they're going to do that. And they're going to do it a little less one-on-one, but they're going to do it there. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. Everybody has their mode, but we all have this idea of how our child is going to go from being a baby to going to school, and there's a whole bunch of things that they're going to learn there. It's just that normally we think it just happens organically. And, you know, now knowing what I know, when I see a kiddo who's 2, who is gaining language in a way that I used to think that kids gain language in that sort of, you know, typical developmental way, I look at that and I go, that is just freaking miraculous. That a kid can just soak in and learn all those words without somebody having to like plan and put it all together. That is miraculous. And yet people walk by that all the time and don't even notice it because it's just part of their understanding of the world, right? But the problem becomes when you have a kiddo that doesn't soak up that language, or in my case, my child was soaking it up, and then something happened and he wasn't soaking it up. And then he started to lose the language that he had to the point where he virtually lost all of it. So, you know, what do you do then? What is the course of action that you take then? And I certainly had experts who told me, you know, well, just love him exactly as he is. And I did love him exactly as he was, but I saw that there was something in him that was struggling because he no longer could communicate his needs to me. And so instead of communicating his needs to me, he would bite me or kick me or hit me to get what he wanted. And I had bite marks all up and down my arm. Did I love my child any less? No. But did I see that as a path to let's just accept this and love him for who he is? He's now someone who bites to communicate. No, I did not see that as a possibility. I wanted for him to be able to communicate his needs to the world, not just to me, but to the world. And I wanted him to have a fair chance in the world to be able to do whatever he wanted to do. And I hope everybody hears me when I say, not what I wanted him to do. Yeah, sure. For all parents, we have that dream for our children. Every parent has that. And every parent has to learn how to let go of that and let their child be who they are, right? Watch the movie Brave. That is the theme of the movie, is that the mom and the daughter have to figure out how to accept each other for who they are. That's a typical parent-child struggle. But it always comes from a place of love. As parents, we want for our kids to be happy, safe, and so on and so forth. Well, Sarah asked a question. Shannon, can you tell me what is common between all recovered individuals with autism? And I will tell you that I've looked at this extensively because as a mom, and I know that the word recovered is very triggering for people. So let me just say that when we use I don't usually use the word recovered here anymore because it's so triggering for people. But what the term means to me is that someone at a certain point got a diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder. And what that meant was that there were enough symptoms of autism that were in their life that were preventing them from being able to live a life that was productive and get their needs met without support. And so that's why it's called a disorder, because you can't get your needs met without support. And that there are some individuals who learn enough skills, doesn't change their brain chemistry or the way their brain thinks and looks at things in a unique way, but they learn workarounds for things so that they no longer need support. That they can go and live their life and communicate their needs, and they don't need support. So we can no longer say that they have a disorder. Do they still have autism? Sure, their brain still works in a very unique and beautiful way, but they no longer have a disorder. And that is certainly how I would classify my son now. That I don't think anybody could meet my son or look at his life and say, that young man has a disorder. He doesn't. He just doesn't. But he did at one point. And so Sarah is asking about, there are many people that are like that no longer qualify, medically no longer qualify for the designation of a disorder. And some people call that recovered. You can call it whatever you want. But what do they all have in common, the folks that are there? And I think what they have in common is that somebody gave them skills and they made sure that they were healthy enough to learn them. And they did it intensively, which is what we're talking about today. Because in order to learn any new skill, it takes time. And different people, it takes different amounts of time. And so that's why I want to talk about intensity. So let's go on to the next one. So if I were to say to you, if we work at this from the opposite end, and if I were to say to you, assuming that you're all ponies here with me, and there may be people who are on the spectrum and also ponies, that you have kids on the spectrum, it's a very common thing that we ask ourselves, what do we want for our children? And, your list might look vastly different from this, but this is just some of the things that I thought of, because I ask parents this all the time. Instead of like jumping in and talking about ABA and intensity, I usually start here. What is it you want for your child? What are the things, what are your core values? What are the things that are important to you? And everybody says, I want my child to be able to communicate. Most people say, I want my child to be able to have friends. I want for them to be a part of the family or be a part of a community. That, there have been parents over the years who've said to me, if my family loved to go to dinner, it was the way we celebrated every major event. And now for 20 years, we try to take my son because we don't want to leave him home. He's part of our family. But what happens is that two people have to be assigned to him and we tag team, and those people can't be a part of the festivities because they're helping support him, and he gets up and he runs around the restaurant. He's taking food off of other people's plates. It's embarrassing. We want him to be able to sit at the table and be a part of the family. And I just don't think anybody should poo-poo that. I think that that's an important goal for a family, right? Which, by the way, that individual, once they were able to say that, they were able to work with that family so that they do that now regularly. I want to make sure that I put that in everybody's backpack, that is possible, right? Other people say, I want my child to be able to enjoy life. Boy, it ripped me to shreds. There was one dad that when I asked this question, he said, I just would like to know, will there ever come a time when he will be able to appreciate a good piece of music? Like when I hear a piece of jazz and and this dad, you could tell he was just transported when he was talking about it. He said, will that be something that my child will ever be able to do? Enjoy something deeply on that level. And yes, that is possible, of course. Other people say, I really want my child to do well academically. I want them to be able to be in school and learn and know things, because that's important. And many people say, I'd like for my child to have a job. And many say, I want for them to have a family of their own. There's so many things we could put on this list, and I would love it if you guys would, feel free to shout out and say what would what isn't on the list that you would like to include on this list. But it's okay. I think sometimes we're told as parents of neurodiverse individuals that, well, you got to let go of expectation and hope and, throw it all out the window. I think that's crap. I think that you have as much right, we have as much right to dream as anybody else. And that I always talk about, if you go to the mall and you need to get to Macy's or JCPenney, the first thing that you do is if you've never been to this mall before, you could wander around that mall for hours and you'll find things for sure, but you may never get to Macy's, right? So when I go to a mall, I'm old school, I guess. I'm like, where's the little podium that says you are here? And then I get to chart the course. Okay, I'm right here, and so I'm going to go to Macy's. Now, I may stop off at other places on the way and decide that I just have to have an Annie's pretzel, right? That's fine. And I may decide not to go to Macy's, but I like to know, where am I right now, and where is it that I'd like to go? I like to go with intention. So if you know what the things are that you want for your child, then you can communicate that to his teachers and his team, and you will have a level of clarity that will help you to hopefully get where you want to go. I think that that's important, knowing what you want. And it's a little bit different for everybody. We may have things in common, but one of the things that I remember the first time that my husband was ever able to access the emotion of, I don't know what's going to happen and I'm a little bit afraid. It was a moment we named our son, and his nickname is Jem, from the book To Kill a Mockingbird. And we went on a trip when he was 3, and I was already in the what are we going to do mode. Sarah said, I would like them to be independent. Yes, that should be on the list here too. But anyway, right before we went on the trip, my husband went to see a stage version of To Kill a Mockingbird, and I didn't go because we couldn't get a babysitter that we knew could handle his behaviors. So he went by himself, and then a couple of days later we were traveling, and it was like the worst trip in the history of man. We had all these connecting flights and they kept being canceled, and my child had explosive diarrhea, and our baggage had already arrived somehow. It got on the plane when we didn't, and we were stuck at an airport, not at home, and I was having to wrap dish towels around my child because he had explosive diarrhea through every article of clothes that I had in the diaper bag and the carry-on. It was terrible, right? And in the middle of all of it, my husband, he just had the reality check, right? And the emotion popped up and he started to cry, and I said, what's going on? And he said, is he ever going to be able to be in a play? Will he ever know the joy of what it is to be able to perform on stage and be with people? Because that was important to my husband. He was like, that's part of the big joy in life. And he was like, is he ever going to have an opportunity to do that? And I held my husband's hand, and I said, I don't know, but we're going to work towards it, right? Let's work towards it. My son's been in so many plays, and he's a newly declared theater minor. So I think when you declare what you want, you know what Dr. Phil says, you have to name it to claim it, right? And then you can move towards it with intention. I think you have a better chance of getting there if you know where you're going, right? So this is where I want to start. And then the question that I always ask people is, I ask these 2 questions. How does your child learn, and is your child behind? Because there are people on this planet who have these typically developing kids that you can sit them down in front of PBS, and they can watch PBS and they learn language. And then they can apply it to different things. It's that miracle that I was talking about, right? And some kids learn that way, and they pick up language from just listening to it, right? All of our kids don't. And we have to at least get into some form of acceptance about that. That if because the question I ask is your child behind? And you may not know this for sure, but if you feel, and there are milestones that you can look up to see where your child should be at different times, and you should be going to your pediatrician, and your pediatrician should be checking this. And they sometimes will say, well, we're a little bit behind, but I wouldn't panic. And I don't know, I mean, I don't want anybody to panic. Don't panic. There's no point in panicking, right? I don't want anybody to panic, but I want you to kick it into gear. If someone tells you that your 1-year-old is a little bit behind on sitting up and holding their head up, don't panic, but they should be referring you to someone who can be working with your child to strengthen their core muscles so that they can sit up and lift and hold their own head up. Because if they don't get that, they're going to miss the next set of milestones because they're not going to be sitting up. And I didn't really get this as a parent. Even though I had taken some early childhood development classes, I kind of just didn't get it. So my child didn't crawl. He just didn't crawl and didn't crawl and didn't crawl. He thought he could walk when he was 9 months old. Actually, he thought he could walk when he was 6 months old, but he couldn't. His legs weren't strong enough. And so he would roll everywhere. And if you held him up, he would try to walk away from you and he'd face plant, right? But he really just didn't, he wasn't interested in crawling, and we, did a couple of things, but the people around us said, don't worry about it. I just don't believe in that anymore. Because I think you got to worry about it just enough to go, hey, let's hit the milestones. And it doesn't have to be for very long. And eventually somebody said to me, you need to make sure he crawls before he walks. And I was like, well, not really. And they were like, no, there's some eye and brain development that happens because of crawling and coordination that if you miss it, you're going to have problems later on. And I went, what? Are you serious? Are you kidding me? And our dear departed Joanne Lara, she did her whole dissertation on the brain and movement and how cognitively things happen. I sat in on her classes and I went, what? Because she would have kids move and they could contact language better. And she would work sometimes with stroke victims and she would say, forget everything else. Let's get them crawling again. Let's make the connection back with the brain. So it's not just the 2-year-olds. If your child never crawled, make a fun exercise and get them to crawl so that they can strengthen their vision and make that connection with the brain. So if your child is behind, it is not something to sit around and go, let's see what comes out of the laundry. And if a doctor is telling you to do that, I'm telling you either get a second opinion or decide to do something different. Milestones are there, and we don't have to be rigid about it, right? If it says that the milestone is that they need, it should start emerging around 6 months, they should have it by 9 months, great. I don't really care about the dates on that. I care about if your child is 3 and you look at the milestones and go, oh, we're not doing that, that you say, okay, but we're going to make a concerted effort to teach our child this, right? But don't lose sleep over it, move into action. Excuse me, as Lisa Ackerman from TACA says, it's not game over, it's game on, right? We're really sending TACA some love today. So if your child is behind, I think it becomes important and incumbent upon us that we try to get them caught up and never let them fall behind again. That was the phrase that Dr. Graham-Pichet used to say to parents whenever she would do an intake. She would say, well, let's get your child caught up. Your child is behind. Let's get your child caught up and let's never let them fall behind again. I loved that. That saying to me as a parent, I was like, well, all right then. Because it sounded like it was something that they could do. And guess what? They can. It's not the same for everybody. Outcomes are not the same for everybody. There are so many variables. When you start, how old, how intense, which is what we're talking about today, the learning is, and the learning style of the child, and there may be other factors that would prevent the child from learning, medical or another diagnosis, a coexisting diagnosis. Okay, but let's talk basically about what we know about learning. I'm a former teacher, which, means nothing. We're all students on this planet, right? But there's been a great deal of research about what is effective teaching. And here's what we know about effective teaching. Effective teaching gives clear instructions so that the person can understand what the instructions are, which for a person on the spectrum, that means you might have to communicate it in a different way. It gives tons of opportunity, tons and tons of opportunity for the person to try. which means that sometimes you're not going to get it, but you get tons and tons of opportunity. But it isn't just about the opportunity, because you need to get fairly immediate feedback. So you try something, and if it's not working, somebody lets you know, no, that's not working here. Let me show you again. Try this. You get the feedback for it. This is for teaching anyone anything. Anyone anything. This is the roadmap. And then getting some sort of reinforcement regularly so that you don't get frustrated and you don't give up. If there was something that you wanted to learn and you didn't, let's take a look at this list and say what went wrong. I want to play the guitar. I'm only rudimentary at the guitar, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't always get myself clear instruction. I try to learn it from the book by myself, which it's an experiential thing. I really should have a person there. The instruction isn't clear enough. I don't practice enough. And part of the reason why I don't practice enough is there's nobody to give me feedback. And the only reinforcer is when I do it well, which if I don't do enough of it, I don't really get the reinforcer, right? So when we have all 4 of these pumping, people learn. And they learn at different rates, but they will learn. And there are all kinds of things that we can teach individuals when we use this. I am not saying that this is just for autism. If you were trying to teach a 32-year-old something, to teach them how to ski, this is exactly the same roadmap for them as it would be for a non-vocal 5-year-old on the spectrum. Clear instructions that the individual understands, tons of opportunity, immediate feedback, and reinforcement. And reinforcement has to be something that is actually reinforcing to the person. And so when we talk about reinforcement, it's like, it's big enough, it's meaningful enough to me that I'm willing to work through the frustration to keep doing the opportunity and getting the feedback. If all I hear is no, that's not it, you suck, right? I don't want to do this anymore because it's not rewarding to me, right? So what I've just described to you is ABA. I know, some people just went, what? But ABA has been found to be the most effective teaching technique because this is what it espouses. Clear instruction, tons of opportunity, feedback, and reinforcement. I know you've heard and seen a whole lot more about ABA than that, but this is the heart of it. And, we know that this is effective. This gets used in Fortune 500 companies. It gets used in senior citizens' homes. It gets used in regular classrooms. Olympic athletes use this. Still, at this point, with so many people doing ABA for autism, it's estimated that about 50% of the people working in the field of ABA are working in autism. The rest of them are working in the business and healthcare training and teaching because this is what they're doing. However, we do know that it's effective for kids with autism. How do we know this? Where did the 40-hour thing come from? Because there is a recommendation for kids between the ages of 3 and 5 of doing 40 hours a week. Where did that come from? What's the reason that we talk about this? If you watch Ask Dr. Doreen, then you know, because she talks about this, that there was something called the Young Autism Project. It was led by a guy named Ivar Lovaas, and he had a group of students at UCLA, and he was running a study. And it was called the Young Autism Project. Now, I think it's notable that before he did the Young Autism Project, he got funding, and he had 2 subjects in a study, and they were a little bit older. They were like 9 and 10. And they were working with this 9 and 10-year-old, and it was a boy and a girl, and they were able to make tremendous progress with this 9 and 10-year-old. And then their funding ran out. So I think they did around a year with them, and I don't know how many hours. I have something on my lip, and it's driving me crazy. But sorry, you guys. But the thing was, they didn't get to do a great level of intensity, and then they had to stop. So I don't know whether it was 6 months or a year that they did with this boy and this girl, but they'd made tremendous, and there's video of this somewhere. But they had made tremendous progress. They gained all these skills. They were able to ask for the things that they wanted. It was just truly amazing. And then the funding dried up, and they didn't get to see the kids for 2 years. And when they came back, the kids had regressed to a great degree. They had lost a lot of the skills that they had. So they worked with them again, and I think in that instance, they worked with them a little bit longer, a little bit more intensively. They got back all the things they lost. They gained even more skills, and then the funding dried up again, and they didn't get to work with them again, but they came back to see them. And again, those kids had lost their skills. And I think the feeling of the team was it didn't stick. It didn't stick, and that's unfortunate, because you can make the progress, but the minute you stop the intensity, it goes away. And then Lovaas had this idea, maybe it's because developmentally they were just older, and maybe we need to start with younger kids. So they got funding to work with a larger group of kids that were between the ages of 3 and 5. And they said, we are going to work with them 40 hours a week. And they arbitrarily, by the way, Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh was one of the UCLA students that was one of the main people that was involved in this. She was one of the main people doing the therapy with the kiddos, along with other people, Tris Smith and other people. Unfortunately, Tris Smith is no longer with us. But they were the main people. And Dr. Granpeesheh talks all the time how amazing that we are able to talk regularly with somebody who was there in the original, mother of all studies. And she says all the time, we chose 40 hours to be in the clinic because that's what parents were working. And so we knew that we could have access to the kids because the parents were happy to be at work, and we would have them that's how we started. But our intention was not 40 hours a week. Our intention was that we would also train the parents, and whatever we were doing in the clinic, the parents would go home and do. And in that way, the kids would have this educationally enriched environment every waking hour. So when you get hung up on the 40-hour thing, I want to say to you, it's not really about the 40 hours. It's about every waking hour. But if you had the opportunity to have other people helping you for 40 hours, more is better. Okay, and here is why. Because this first study that I believe was published in 1987, they had 3 groups of kids. And in the first group of kids, they were kids that at the end of a 2-year period of 40 hours, and remember they were between the ages of 3 and 5, they no longer qualified for an autism spectrum disorder. They no longer qualified for the diagnosis. They no longer needed further supports, and they were virtually indistinguishable from their neurotypical peers. Meaning that if you put them in a room with kids who had never had a diagnosis of autism, could even a professional pick out which one was the kid who had had the diagnosis before. That's what that means. And I've also seen video of those kids in that first group years later with other peers, and I can't figure out which one is the kid. I can't. So that was amazing, and that was life-changing. I'm going to go into this a little bit more, but I want to talk about the other groups because that wasn't everybody's outcome. And we need to be clear about that. We're not, selling hearts, flowers, and roses. We're selling truth here, right? There was a second group of kids in the outcome that they made great strides. They learned all kinds of things, but they continued to need some level of support after leaving the program. And it was differing levels of support, but these kids made, by anybody's estimation, tremendous support. That made tremendous strides. And then there was a third group of kids what the strides that they made were mainly with adaptive skills, that they could feed themselves, they could toilet themselves, they could, take their clothes on and off, they could be helpful around the home, but they were going to need tremendous support throughout their life to support their living. They were never going to live independently, and that they were going to need a caretaker to be with them But the parents of that group, and I've seen some of these people be interviewed, they were overjoyed. They were like, this person is a member of my family. They help set the table. We don't have, big outbursts. They can communicate their needs to us. But they weren't, this group of individuals was not going to live independently. They were going to need support. Sometimes the kids in group 2 were able to eventually live independently, but they had needed some supports, right? But after only 2 years, so we're talking that these kids were, because they started between 3 and 5, so these kids were between 5 and 7 in group 1, they didn't need anything else. They didn't need more support. And I'm going to be real with you here for a second. My son was in group 2. My son, after 2 years, still needed more. And so we stuck around and did 5 years. And even then, he was still considered in group 2 and he was still needing support. It took him many more years, but now I think he would be considered in group 1. So let's talk a little bit about what the statistics were. So group 1 was about 47% of the kids that were in this group. And group 3 was 11%, and group 2, I can never remember what the number is, but it's whatever the difference is between 147 and 11. So the thing that happened when this study came out is people lost their minds. Because you have to understand this, before that, there was nobody saying that there was any help. People were telling people, institutionalize your child and walk away. There will be no help. There is nothing that you can do to help your child to gain new skills. That was the party line. And then in 1987, Lovaas published the Young Autism Project, and parents lost their mind and said, okay, 40 hours is a lot, but if there is a 47% chance that my child will no longer have to have a disabling aspect of their life, let's go for it. It's important to note that those parents were signing up to pay for it out of pocket because there was no insurance, because insurance said, it's one study. You better replicate that thing because we don't have to pay for something if there's just one study. So more studies were done, and guess what? They replicated. Always the group 1 was somewhere in the 40s. Sometimes it was 42, sometimes it was 48, right? But if those kids got a certain level of intensity, and we're talking amongst the studies, there is a window between 25 and 40 hours a week that the kids were getting. Now, it's hard because some kids were able to do it with 25, but I don't think that that's really most kids. That wouldn't have been my kid. I'm just going to be honest with you. My kid couldn't even get in group 1. He wasn't counted in the 47%. Hear me when I say that. My kid needed more. He needed group 2, and we needed to continue, but he still eventually got in group 1. And this is why it's important that I tell you. And even the parents who had kids who ended up in group 3 said, this was life-changing. They have a life now. We have a life. We can go to the restaurant. They can toilet themselves. We're not in diapers. And our child can communicate. Sometimes it was vocal, sometimes it wasn't. But this is where the 40-hour thing came from. But this study did get replicated again and again and again. And this is where we came up with this idea of the 25 to 40-hour window. And there's a little star there because I wanted to put an asterisk, but I couldn't with the thing that I was doing. But the asterisk is that if, have you ever watched a commercial where they show, people who've lost a bunch of weight, and then on the bottom it says results may vary? And we already saw that results may vary, right? That your kid might be in the first group, or they might be in the second group, they might be in the third group. And I think that any time that you are putting 25 hours of ABA into your life, it's going to disrupt your life. Can we all just hug ourselves and acknowledge it's going to disrupt your life? And if you're going to disrupt your life, shouldn't you go whole hog for the whole thing in order to have the best possible chance? This was my thinking as a parent. Plus which, because of all those studies that replicated it, insurance no longer had a leg to stand on. Insurance doesn't have to fund something if it isn't effective. And there were too many studies that showed that it was effective for way too many kids for insurance to back down. So insurance funds it right now. I don't know how long that's going to be, you guys. You know why? Because insurance, and if you fight it all, if you say to your insurance company, if you have a child that's between the ages of 3 and 6 even, if you go in and fight and say, I want a 40-hour program, you're going to win. There's a path, and I'm happy to help you take it, but you're going to win. You know why? Because the studies are on the side of that, and the insurance companies know. They may not give it to you out the gate, but they will write you a prescription for it. I've seen it thousands of times in the last few years. They will write you the prescription for it so that you don't have to pay for it out of pocket. That's just, to so many of us who didn't have that, that is amazing to us. But here's the bad thing, is that they'll write you the prescription for 40 hours, but then they say to you, you go find somebody in our network to give you 40 hours. And good luck, because that's the hard part. Nobody has enough therapists to give you 40 hours right now. Now, there are, and George, I'm going to get to your question in just a second here. But there are parents who fight and say, I want to do the 40-hour program. And they will go back to the insurance and they will say, this is denial of access to care because you're not giving me a provider in network, and they'll take one, and insurance will give you an out of network to be able to get the 40 hours. And I'm telling you that I think you want to be in the window with good ABA, but we're going to talk about what good ABA is. Because George, I love you, and I'm glad that you're here because we're going to talk about all of this. But you got to be, if you want to be in that group 1 for your child, if you want to give them their best chance, you have to be in the 25 to 40 hour window. Nobody has found anything else that would get your child into that group 1 with anything else. It isn't there. There are things that will help your child to get in group 2 or group 1, but if you group 3, but if you want to be in that group 1, this is your best chance. Does it add up? Okay. But this is where I got into a sticky wicket this weekend talking to people about intensity, because people think when you talk about doing a 40-hour program with a 3-year-old of intensity with ABA, that there are a lot of people, I didn't think that ABA people thought this, but I'm learning, there are people who think that you're just going to sit and do DTT. And DTT is when you're sitting at a table with somebody and they will say something like, you know, touch phone. And you touch phone and then they you know, do it again, and they'll say, okay, now, you know, you've got the bobblehead on the phone, touch. You know, I'm doing a bad example here, but this is what it looks like to all of us, right? And that is a part of ABA, of discriminative training to be able to discriminate between a couple of things, and I'll talk about that in a second. It is only a very small part of it. What a really good ABA program for a kiddo who is 3, and I know because I did this and I watched the whole thing on a baby cam, so I know what it looks like. And then I watched other people do it, and I know exactly what it looks like. Is that, you know, the therapist comes and has time and, you know, takes an opportunity to have rapport with the child and talks to the child about what are you doing? You know, what are we playing with today? And notices the things that they're doing, you know, and asks them questions for whatever their ability is. They will give them an assessment, a preference assessment where they will show them things and say, you know, if it's a baby, they put 3 things out and see what does the baby go for. If it's an older kid, they'll say, what do you want to work for today? What would be the best reward for you today? And the kid will say, I want to go to the park. And they go, great, let's work for going to the park. We're just going to do a couple of quick things, and then we're going to go to the park, right? And then they will do some things, and depending on what the child is working on, they will do some very formalized one-on-one teaching with the child. They will try to make it fun. They will do that list of things where they'll give them a clear instruction. Like, you know, if it is a thing where somebody was trying to learn the difference between a bobblehead and a phone, it's a ridiculous example, but, you know, they would put them there and say, touch the phone. And then I would touch the phone and they'd go, good job. You know what a phone is. What is it? It's a phone. It's absolutely a phone. And then they would move it around and they would go, okay, touch the phone. And you touch the phone, they go, yay, good job, do the phone. And they would do this a couple of different times before they move on to something else. Now, it sounds ridiculous, but it's brilliant. and my mother learned this the hard way, and if I have time, I will do this. But they are not reprimanding the child. Nobody's harming the child. Nobody's hurting the child. Nobody, if the child doesn't get it right, if they say, okay, touch phone, and the child touches the bobblehead, they'll go, oh, touch phone. And they'll put their hand on the phone, and then they'll go, good job. That is not torture. That is teaching. And ABA is a teaching technique. That is what ABA is. ABA is a teaching technique. Now, we have all had teachers who were buttheads. We have all had teachers that, didn't teach and build our self-esteem and been terrible. I acknowledge that there have been ABA professionals who have done things that were not to the letter of good ABA. That is not okay with me, not on my watch. I would not allow someone to do that to my child, and I'm telling you, don't allow someone to do that to your child. They do not get belittled, they don't get punished, they don't get reprimanded. You can send a child with autism to a daycare center, and very quickly that child, is not going to be able to conform to the norm of what they're doing at the daycare center, and they're going to get frustrated, and then they're going to give them a time out and take them away from everyone because they couldn't communicate, and it's going to get not good for their self-esteem. That is a very real possibility. And if you send a child to be included in a mainstream classroom with no help and support, it will quickly go south, right? But good ABA is all about the child, their learning style, how quickly they learn, and it reinforces them. Now, here's the thing with intensity, is that you don't do this for 40 hours. This is like step one of a 30-step thing. If I was trying to teach an individual phone, right, we would do a couple of this until, maybe 8 out of 10 trials. I would probably only do 10 trials to begin with. And I would do it quick. Like maybe it takes a minute and a half to do 10 trials. Can you touch the phone? Touch the phone. Yes, dude. And we, whatever is meaningful to the child. Some kids like to have their heads, their hair ruffled. Some just like the praise. Some like a different reward, but they get small reward for getting it right. And then they get another opportunity. Let's do it again. But it's exciting. It's fast paced. It's like, all right, I'm going to, shell game this. Okay. All right. You ready? You ready? You ready? Touch the phone. And they touch the phone. Yes. Fantastic. And we may not even do 10 trials, but we would never do more than 10 trials. And then we go, okay, all right, we're going to do one more thing. Now we're going to, and maybe I'm teaching them red. And so I go, touch the one that's red. And they, we do the same thing, I do 10 more trials. And I might do 2 or 3 of these, and I give a sticker for every time we do a 10 trial. And then I go, okay, now we're going to the park. Now we're going to the park. And on the way to the park, we're going to work on safety on the way to the park. We're going to practice stopping and going, right? And then we're going to get to the park, and we're going to work on things while we're playing in the sand. And it's like the best preschool you could ever imagine in your life. That somebody who understands your kiddo and your kiddo's mode of learning and their mode of communication has a clear path of here's what we're teaching the child to scaffold up for them to, that is what good ABA is. It doesn't look like a child sitting for 40 hours at a table and being told you have to sit there and touch car. That is not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about intensity. I'm talking about this mix of, because if I just, there's natural environment training and there's discrete trial training, and all of them are a part of ABA, right? And if I only ever teach DTT, I'm not teaching them how to be in the environment. That is bonkers. And that is not good ABA. And a lot of people think that DTT, that discrete trial training, which is that thing that I was just showing, which looks weird, looks odd, looks weird, touch phone, everybody is like, oh, that looks totally, totally weird, except that it's part of that clear instruction. If I don't know what a phone is and I don't have a reference for it, having that piece where it's touch phone, that helps me to know, and I've watched it. We'll do another show just on what DTT is and how it's but here's what I want you to know, is that there are people who go, don't do DTT, it's just terrible, it's wrong. And I go, no. If I was gonna take somebody skiing and I took them up on the mountain, I wouldn't just throw them down the mountain, right? First, we start in the ski shop and we talk about here are our supplies and here's what we're gonna do. Then we go out on the mountain and I'm on a flat thing and they show me how to turn my feet in to stop, right? They took it outside of the environment of where we're going to use it to show you something up close and personal. That's DTT. Now, but if that's all you ever did to teach somebody how to ski was show them that and then walk away, they're going to hurt themselves on that mountain. That's what's going to happen. And I always like to say that when we're talking about ABA, imagine that ABA is the car and you've decided to go to Las Vegas. DTT is the steering wheel. You're going to have a really hard time getting to Las Vegas without the steering wheel. But no one would ever go, I'm going to Las Vegas, and take their steering wheel and try to get there. The steering wheel is important. It's a way to get you there, but it is not the whole thing. You got to have the engine and the wheels and all of that stuff too. So George says that he doesn't like ABA. He says it's abusive. And George, I want to tell you that any teaching method can be if it's in the wrong hands. And George, I feel like that, you know, you're coming from a place where that was your experience. And I want to acknowledge that, George, and say, I'm sorry that that happened to you. But George, you've been with us before. I think I like you and I think you like me. And look at me, George. Do I look like somebody who would have allowed somebody to do that to my son? Not on any Tuesday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I would never have allowed that. And when I tell you it didn't happen, you know, please hear me and say that it is possible that you can teach someone one-on-one using these techniques and do the exact opposite of tearing them down. It's not abusive. My son learned how to communicate. He learned how to say no and how to deal with, you know, when somebody asks you to do something you don't want to do, how to say no and how to be heard, how to have boundaries, how to be safe. That was really important. And George says that Lovaas was abusive. He didn't see autistics as people, and there are other ways. There are quotes that people have from Lovaas from his very early years that I also don't like. They're not my favorite. I don't agree with everything that Lovaas said, and I want to be very, very clear about that. That's just the truth. But Lovaas also made sure that the world knew that people who are on the autism spectrum can learn. And he made sure that the world knew that in an environment in which it was thought that that wasn't true, George. And so for that, I don't love some of the things that I wasn't there when he said them, so, you know, but there are things that I disagree with that Lovaas said. I want to be very clear about that. But as somebody said to me recently, do you understand that most of the intense burn protocol that we do with burn patients now, where that came from? That came from the Nazis. That they learned how to treat extreme burns from the Nazis. That's where the genesis of that research came from. And I find that very abhorrent and unsettling. But I'm not going to say in a burn unit, don't use that technique because the people who invented it were not pure of heart. If it's going to give relief to a patient, it's not hurting them now, I'm going to say let's use it. Yes, it's difficult. It's difficult to know that. But let's take what we can that's good. And the good, we could argue about a whole bunch of things about Lovaas, but Lovaas taught the world that people on the autism spectrum can learn. They just learn in a different way. They learn at a different rate, but they can absolutely learn. So for that reason, as a parent, I said, we are going to do this technique. But I didn't do it blindly. I'm not a lemming. I had cameras set up so that I could watch every single minute of what was happening with my son, because making my son be able to speak, the first person who diagnosed him told me not to do ABA because they would torture him. I was told that. And let me tell you, I was on watch. Nobody was going to torture my child, and they didn't. George also says it forces an autistic to neglect their own feelings for the benefit of neurotypicals. The disability starts with neurotypicals and their rigid society. And you know what? I don't disagree with you about that, George, at all. I think, you know, there was a big emphasis on teaching eye contact and being very rigid about it. And I agree with you that that was solely for people, for a world built for neurotypical people. And I am so glad to report that when I was at this conference on Wednesday, the whole conference was about compassionate ABA and about the fact that, eye contact it should not be a be-all, end-all, and no one should be forced to make eye contact. And I think you're going to see that the field of ABA is listening. They are listening, George. And George says it's compliance training. It doesn't look like it to you because you're neurotypical, but I'm telling you it is. I encourage you to look at the double empathy problem. And George says it's patronizing and that there is no good ABA. And why would autistics lie about the abuse? And I'm telling you, I don't think that anybody's lying about abuse. I absolutely don't think that they're lying about that. I think that there have been people who've done bad ABA, and I feel horrible about that. And I want to be a part of just like I feel bad when somebody tells me that their third grade teacher tore their self-esteem down. I want to be part of the solution of saying, how can we train teachers better so that they don't do that, even inadvertently when they mean well? And how do we get rid of bad characters, bad actors, who are not people who should be working with anyone, who should go into another line of work. I don't think that anybody's lying about it, George. But I think the issue is that what you're taking issue with is that the delivery of the method, and that's a very real deal, and I don't want to in any way minimize that. That's why I said I'm so glad you're here and that we bring this up. Because for the parents, you're going to meet people on the spectrum who are going to say what George is saying, is that it's abusive and that it's coercive and that it takes away your free will. I can only tell you that I watched and I talk to my son every day now and say, do you ever, and he talks about how he feels about ABA. And he feels very good about the ABA that he had. There's one gripe that he has that I share with ABA providers now all the time, which is that he says, I was taught what things were, but I wasn't taught the value of them. Like, I was taught, well, this is a car and this is a dog, but I wasn't taught, that this one is, has more value than this one. And I said to my son recently when he said this to me, because he wrote about it in his college essay, and I said, oh, that's so interesting. I chose that for you because I didn't want anybody to put that on you. I wanted for you to choose what was more important. I wanted for it to be your decision. Is the dog more important than the car? I didn't want anybody to put their beliefs on you. And my son said, oh, you should have told me that. And I said, yeah, I should have told you that. But what day would I have known that you would have understood? But honestly, George, it was that self-directed that, that may be too much for him. So I don't think that you're lying about the abuse at all, any more than I would think that somebody who said that their third grade teacher hit them was lying about it. I don't want to say that I think you're lying about it, but I do think that there are people who are doing ABA really well, and it's like the best preschool you could ever hope for your child, where your child is encouraged to bring themselves to it, that they're encouraged to find what they like and who they are and what their boundaries are, and to exercise them. And I think that that's really important. And George, you say, why don't neurotypicals go through this to understand and cooperate with autistics? I think we're trying really hard. I really want to tell you, George, I'm trying really hard to listen and to be a force of saying that there are some things that people on the spectrum have brought up that didn't occur to me would be troubling. And I see the ABA professionals taking that into consideration. I was just talking about Emily Groden earlier, and in her book, she says, here's what I didn't like about ABA. I didn't like them being in my home. I prefer for my home to be my safe place where I don't have to have somebody asking me to do something. I go to school and people ask me to do stuff, and I wanted that to be someplace other than my home. I felt invaded when they were in my home. How edifying is that to think about? And that may not be everybody's opinion, but I've gone back to ABA providers and said, you should be asking the child where would they like to get their therapy, because maybe they don't want to get it at home, or maybe they don't want to get it at the center. Different kids, different things. But the other thing that Emily said, because Emily was non-vocal, is she was bored. She was bored. that because she was nonvocal, they weren't always presuming that competence, and they assumed that she wasn't understanding them because she didn't have a way of communicating to them that she was understanding them. And, I believe that in the 11th commandment of thou shalt not bore. So anyway, Stewardess says, we live in a world where you have to assimilate to be productive adults in society, so you should want your child to be able to blend in with neurotypicals so they can live their best life and care for themselves. And if that is your opinion, that is your opinion. I feel a little bit differently about that, to be honest with you. I don't think that our kids should have to assimilate. I am kind of on the other opposite of the spectrum. I think that we all need to learn how to take the communication that they're giving us. I really honestly do. However, I'm a teacher and I'm about skills. And, I watched my son be decimated and lay on the floor of a house of a friend of mine because he was trying so hard to get the other kids to play with him. And he said, what do I have to do to get them to play with me? And it made me so mad at those other kids. And I lined out all of my friends and said, could you please ask your children to make an effort and to include him? And if he doesn't ask in the way that is, the way that they're used to, could they just sort of, grow up a little bit and include him? It wasn't really effective because those kids aren't taught those skills. And yes, I want to teach those kids those skills. But in the meantime, do I just let my kids suffer while the rest of the world is learning how to? No. So what we did was we went back to our ABA team and said, what can we put in his backpack? What skill can we give him when it isn't working to check and go, well, maybe I'll try this way? Because what he wanted was connection. He wanted to play with them. And I was like, how can we give that to him? And if there was a skill that I could give him so that he could have the connection. And I just want to bring home that it wasn't that I wanted the connection. I want to make sure that he plays with those kids, and so he's got to play their way. That wasn't the configuration. He wanted the connection, and so we wanted to give him the skills so that he had the choice. The thing about when you teach someone a skill is that they don't have to use it. It's their choice. Now, I understand some ABA providers are like, I'm not going to let you get up from the table until you can do it. That's crap. That is total crap. That is not good ABA. That is people being lazy. And I do go talk to ABA providers about exactly that. And they're good people and they take direction. So in any case, George says, how do you be in an environment? How are you in an environment is different from autistics? This is because your entire sensory profile is different. There is no point making an autistic perform like you. I agree, George. I don't want my son to be like me. You know what? His brain is better than mine. I don't want his brain to work like mine. I am trying to learn how to make my brain work like his, right? But I'm not really capable always. His brain can do things that my brain can't do. But my son wants things. And just like anything, I find that when I'm talking to people who are on the spectrum, that if I say to them, what do you wish you knew how to do? Everyone has something. I want to learn how to play the guitar. What do you wish you knew how to do, George? What challenge everybody has challenges. What thing would you like to overcome to be able to do? And that's a place where we can talk about, okay, well, how could we make that happen for you? And that's what good ABA does. Does it have the potential to go south? Yes. With the wrong people, with the wrong attitude, absolutely. Oh, George, you say I'm not listening to you. You're not lying. I hope you understand. I know you're not lying at all. There's no lying to be had. Okay. May says, I started ABA with my daughter, but didn't like what I saw, but a cousin did ABA and can now speak at 6 very well. I decided to try another route. And May, God bless you. That's totally fine. I always say to people, try another provider. Because I have been there and watched other people doing ABA, and I've said, that's not the thing. That is not it. That's not it. I wouldn't do that. So, that's why we try to talk about it here. Anna says, my son is progressing a lot from ABA right now. He surprised me how much he knew already. He has picked up on the PECs, which has allowed him to communicate with me to communicate with him and he with me. He's 5 years old and missed 2 years of ABA with COVID. I'm sending you a hug. It's not too late though, Anna. Fight with your insurance company, make them give you the good ABA and make your provider provide it as well. And she goes on to say he loves his therapist and hugs them every time they walk into the room to greet them. That's a sign that you're with good people. And we're not saying that they're wrong, George. We're not saying that you're wrong. We're not saying that people on the spectrum are wrong. But there was a time and a place when people said, that child has autism, we can't teach them, send them home. And they got sent home. That was legal, and that was fair, and that was right. That is no longer the law of the land. We have mandates that say that people on the spectrum have a right to learn. And if you don't want to learn in the ABA way because there's something that's more effective for you, or if you feel that there's something that's more effective for your child, I have no problem with that whatsoever. None. If it's better for you another way, there is no part of me that wants to change that for you. I can only tell you what I and other people found, that if we did enough of that opportunity and immediate feedback and reinforcement, that our kids got to amazing places. But does it add up? So, and I know we've gone really long here, but I want to really bring this home. We just had on the show Tom Island, who is on the spectrum, and Tom was preparing to do he had done the triathlons before, but he hadn't finished one. And he said, I'm gonna, one of these times I'm gonna finish. And Tom has been training for years to be ready to finish a triathlon, and I'm happy to report that he did. But when he set out to run the triathlon, he had a plan for, I'm going to have to learn how to do this, and I'm going to have to build stamina, and I'm going to have to work at this. And it had to be a certain number of weeks in his and hours in his week for him to be able to do it. And he went and did one triathlon, and he wasn't able to finish. And instead of saying, well, this isn't going to work for me, he said, I guess I'm going to have to work a little bit more intensely. And I'm going to have to stick to this other regimen, and I'm going to have to, because anything that we want to do, you want to play the violin? They'll tell you, there have been studies that you got to spend 5,000 hours practicing the violin productively, which means that, having somebody say, try this with your fingers and you'll get a better tone. But if you do that thing that we talked about, clear instruction, lots of opportunity, immediate feedback and reinforcement, 5,000 hours of opportunity, that's a lot, 5,000 hours, and you'll be able to play the violin. But if you don't give enough reinforcement, you're not going to want to do it for 5,000 hours. So those of you who say, I want my child to be able to speak, I want to tell you, it's hours upon hours upon hours. And in a second, I have a slide that says it has to be fun, because this is the big thing, George. And I really want to speak to George with this. If the good ABA that I'm talking about, if it's not fun, it's not what I'm talking about. It has to be fun for the person. On that list of things was that it had to be reinforcing. And if it's not, if the person is not enjoying themselves, and I don't mean every single minute, because there are times when everybody gets frustrated. There are times when everybody has emotions. But if the person who wrote in said, my son hugs his therapist, this is a very good sign. My son, when there would be the knock at the door, he would go, Piru, Piru. He was so excited that he was going to be there because it was his friend who was going to play with him, and his friend who showed him things that he didn't know how to do. And Peter never made him feel bad about himself, never made him feel like that he was less than or that he was wrong. Peter made him feel like he was somebody who could learn. And that's really what we're talking about. We're not... And then the other part of it is it has to be meaningful to the individual. If it is just to fit in, it's crap. If it is just to make somebody feel better because this is in our world, this is how we shake hands, that's crap. It has to be meaningful to that individual. And I just was at a conference where all weekend long, that's what all the speakers were talking about. It has to be meaningful to the individual. If it isn't, if we're teaching them something that they don't need or want to learn, or it's just so that they can fit in, it's crap. It's crap. And that's not what we're about. When I talk about intensity, if it's not fun, if somebody is saying your child has to sit at a table rigidly and accomplish this, or this before they can get up and play, and they're uncomfortable, that's crap. That is what George is talking about. That is terrorizing. That is compliance training. That's crap. I'm not about that, George. I am not about that. And Tessa says nonverbal children can understand everything. Yes. Yes. And if we haven't learned that, it's because we have not been paying attention. We have so many adults now who talk about when they were nonverbal, either through texting or they're able to speak now, who tell us, oh no, I understood what was happening, right? That's that presumed competence thing. And anytime somebody sits, anybody, whether it's an ABA provider or it's a speech and language pathologist or it's a RSP teacher or the librarian at the school, if they are not teaching your child from a place of presumed competence, stand up and scream and yell bloody murder. And George says, personally, if I heard that something was abusive, I wouldn't risk it for my child. And I said the same thing, George. And for a good solid 6 months, they were offering me ABA, the state of California, and I said, I'm not doing it. And then I got sent to a home of a boy who was doing ABA with a really good ABA provider. And I watched, and I was like, well, that's not abusive. I'm a teacher. That's teaching. I want somebody to teach my child. And then, you know what I did, George? I stayed vigilant. I am the most paranoid puss on the planet, and I stayed vigilant, and I watched what was happening. I did. And we got someplace really great. I would never, there were times when they wanted to test my son, and they were like, well, we want to take him into a room for 2 hours, and we're going to test him. And I was like, not unless there's a two-way mirror. I never, George, said, I'm just going to let you walk away and willy-nilly do what you will. I just didn't. I didn't. I watched it all, and that's why I can now sit and talk about this, because I watched it all, right? Okay. May says, my 6-year-old daughter is using PECS too. I'm going to see if she can get an AAC device. Yes. Anybody who watches our show will tell you that making sure that they have a way to communicate, paramount. We can't leave people with no way to communicate. It's very frustrating. Okay. So early intensive behavioral intervention is where it's at. Now, you might be watching this and you're like, but Shannon, you talked about 3 to 5-year-olds. What about 7 to 9-year-olds? And I'm going to tell you something that is going to make you mad, but the research isn't there. The research isn't there, and that's why insurance tries to pull away your hours and say, we don't really have to pay for that. And they start to diminish your hours, and it's uphill battle. They can't do it when it's early intensive behavioral intervention, and that means before 5. You can push to 6. You can argue COVID took a year away from you, and maybe even get to 7. But insurance is only going to give those hours to people who say, I'm going to use them. They do this fun thing where they say, I'll give you 40 hours. You go to your ABA provider, and the ABA provider says, well, we can't staff 40 hours. We'll staff 15, and we'll work up towards 2025 over the next year because we'll hire people and we'll get there, right? Does this sound familiar to any of you? And then, unfortunately, maybe you do or don't get to the 20 hours, but at the end of the 6 months or the year, the insurance come back and says, well, you only used 15 hours, so we're lowering it to 15 hours because you didn't use it. It's use it or lose it with the insurance company. But if you are a militant parent who's like, I understand what the studies say, and I'm going to be watching to make sure that my child is getting good ABA, and I'm going to be a member of the team, and I'm going to learn everything that that team learns, and we're doing our 40-hour, there are ways for you to find to do it, and the insurance will fund it. And you can fight them. It doesn't take long. I can walk you through it. You can fight them every time they try to reduce your hours, and you can get enough good ABA for your child. You can. You're going to have to learn how to do it yourself so that you can do what they were showing in that original study, which is the parents learned it too, so that every waking hour is an educationally enriched environment. That is the ticket. Now, if you really don't want to do ABA, and you don't want to have ABA professionals in your home or take your child to a center, there are people who have done this on their own. It's super hard. I am not Superwoman. I could not do it without other people, but there are people who have, and if you write into me, I'll show you that pathway and hook you up with some free training so that you can learn all about that. Learn the techniques so that you're applying them and you'll know that you're doing it in a way that is really good, but it's hard. And I've watched people burn themselves out trying to do it by themselves. You got to have a team of people to help you. But I will tell you that if your kiddos are between 3 and 5, please fight for this, because this is the window. This is the time period where you will, if you're in the United States, you will be offered this at a very reduced price where insurance will pay the mother load of it. If you need help with the rest of it, with the copays, also write to me, Shannon at autism-live.com, and I'll show you what a bunch of people have learned to get you through and show you where the grants are and where the hidden money is. But you have a choice right now. You can choose not to believe me, and you cannot do it, and that is one pathway. I think, I said, let's do a Dickens on this. Do you know what a Dickens is? Dickens is when, because with in A Christmas Carol, he gets to look at different outcomes of what could happen. So you have two clear pathways right now that you could choose to do ABA intensively if you have a child that's between the ages of 3 and 5, and listen to what I said and take the precautions that I've given you and be vigilant and do that. And you're going to end up wherever you end up. You're going to be in group 1, group 2, or group 3, but you will know that you did everything that you could, that you gave your child the best chance to be in group number 1. There will never be a moment where you're going to have to gut check yourself and say, what if you'll know that you did it. For me, that was everything. Aside from the fact that my child was going to be safe and not tortured and not put down. That was first and foremost. But second was I wanted to be able, I've said this a million times, I'm going to get emotional. When he graduated from high school, I wanted to be able to look him in the eye and said, we did absolutely everything we could and the world is yours. I dreamt of that. That was the thing that I held in my heart, that if I could do that, then I would have peace of mind. And when my son graduated from a college prep high school with honors a year and a half ago, I said, and they filmed it, I stood there with him and I held hands with him in his cap and gown, and I said, we did everything that we could and you were a rock star and the world is yours now. And it was amazing. It was amazing to know that I could stand there and say that. I have friends who beat themselves up on a daily basis and said, I woulda, coulda, shoulda. What if I had known? Nobody explained it to me. I am telling you what I know, and if you need to know more, I'm happy to chat with you on the phone to tell you so that you know everything you need to know to make this decision. But the decision is yours. And if you decide to go the other path and do something else, you have my best thoughts. And I hope that someday somebody comes back to me and says, no, we took the other path and we still got to where we wanted to go, group 1. You'll get to wherever you're going to go and you'll make your peace with that no matter what. But thus far, I have never heard of anybody getting to group 1 going the other path. Nobody. And it frightens me because right now people are saying, I'm going the path with you, Shannon. I'm doing the ABA. We're doing it intensively. And I say, fantastic. How many hours a week are you getting with your 4-year-old? And they tell me 15. And when I tell you I want to just light my hair on fire, I have very little hair left to light on fire. That is not the path. And you're being sold a bill of goods because you're not in that window. This is the science. If you're not in that window. But now I'm being told about people who are, it's the exact opposite, where they're saying, the parent is saying, and I want you to do that DTT 40 hours a week. No. It has to be some DTT and then you take it right back to playing and doing it in the natural environment. That is what the science shows works. Don't stray from the science. And pick your path, but take a minute to look at the two paths and look at the outcomes and ask yourself, is that where you want to be? I am so happy to work with you that if you're not sure if what you're getting is good, I'm happy to be with you in whatever way that I can, Zoom, whatever. Sarah says, Shannon, but some parents don't have the choice to be as involved as you are. I have to keep a full-time job to be able to afford 40 hours from twins. And Sarah, thank you for saying that. And that is the truth. That is the absolute truth. And I will tell you that for us, it was financial devastation. I tried to be, I started a business and I tried to be working while I was watching. It didn't work. My business went, and we're still, I'm going to be honest with you, we're still digging out of the financial devastation of that. So worth it for me. It is. But I had to do what I could to keep, food on the table while my husband was working to keep a roof over us. It's hard. And, sometimes, you have to sacrifice something to not be homeless. I get it, Sarah. But this is why more and more places started centers where you could drop your child off, still go to work. Now, the hard part about that was then the parents weren't seeing everything that was happening. But there are ways. There are ways that you can do it. I've watched parents do that. There are parents that say to the ABA provider, I need to be checking in on a regular basis. There are parents who've asked for video cameras in the thing so that they can be watching from home. You can't watch endlessly, but you can see enough to see that your child is being treated well. There's always a way. There is always a way. And if you know that you have a good ABA provider, trusting them to take your child during that time and trusting. I was paranoid, so I sat and watched the whole thing. But if you can't do that, trusting them enough to take them, but watching your child to see, is your child happy, well-adjusted? Are they shying away? Are they having new behaviors? I mean, those are the things we would watch if we were taking them to a daycare, right? It's all equal and even. But I just say for people's comfort level, if you need to, watch it. But don't miss out on the parent training. Find the time in your child's programming to get the parent training so that you make sure that when they come home from the 40-hour program, that you can uphold in a very natural environment what they were doing during that time. And Sarah goes on to say, in USA, people are lucky to receive this from insurance. Parents who are in other parts of the world do not have this luxury. And Sarah, isn't it devastating to you? It is to me that there are parents, I talk to them all the time, who say, we'll do 15 and you're offering us 40, we'll wait and see how it goes. And I say to them, you'll never get this opportunity again. If you miss it now, the insurance isn't going to let you come back and petition, and they don't believe me. And it's sad because I know that people in other parts of the world would give anything to have that for their children. And she says, we have to work day and night to ensure our kids receive the right treatment. It is so expensive. It is. And I will tell you, Sarah, it's, I've encouraged people before, if you have to move here for a couple of years, people have. It's hard. People have left their families in other part of the country and come here. And sometimes it didn't work out because they came and it was a pandemic and there aren't therapists. We don't have therapists. It's really, really hard. Anna says, the way I see it, I will do anything out there for my child to help them be prepared for the world without me. And I felt the same way, Anna. Also, it is important to balance your other children and have self-care. Yes. And Tessa says, we don't have ABA in the UK. And I will tell you, Tessa, you do have ABA, but you don't have as much as we have here, and you don't have it funded through in the way that we have through insurance, through your national health care. But it is there. People do get it in the UK, and you can get it. There is a way to do it on your own. Because there was a time and a place here in the States when we didn't have the insurance mandates, right? And there were people who were doing it. And some of them were paying out of pocket. Some of them were creating a program at home for themselves and getting volunteers and training them. And we now have online training we can give you to give your volunteers. When there's a will, there's a way. It's a lot, though. Is it so much easier if you have a team? And is it so much easier if they can staff your thing for 40 hours? Yes. And they don't tell you this because they're afraid of what it will do to you psychically as parents if they say to you, well, you could do it yourself with volunteers. They feel like that's asking too much of you. And I know that it is. But I feel that it's important that you have the information so that you know if you want to do it, you won't be the first one. You can do it. It's going to be hard. It's going to take every last ounce of everything you have. But I'll help you. I'll give you, I'll point you to the free training. I'll tell you that you're doing a good job. Anna says, do you have the studies you were speaking about to make my case to increase hours? Absolutely. I have 6 seminal studies that I keep on my laptop that whenever a parent says, what should I be showing? Yes. But the truth is, usually people have to use those for the school, to fight with the school. I can give them to you to fight with the insurance company, but you don't need to. You don't need to. All you need to do is to say in your appeal, if they have a denial and you ask them to give you the denial in writing, why? And then we can talk about which study you give for which thing or whatever, but really you don't even need it with insurance because they know. It's just going to take 2 appeals. That's what it takes. Insurance, if you know anything about insurance, they regularly deny appeals for everything. It's not just autism. You write and ask for a surgery and they regularly deny appeals. It's well documented, and then people have to appeal. And sometimes people die before the appeal comes in. And it's a way that insurance, it's insidious. I don't even want to talk about that. But with ABA, what happens is, you ask for it in writing, what the reason, and then we write a statement back. I can help you to figure out which argument you put on there. Very short paragraph, doesn't have to be much. And you say, no, and you send it back to them. And I'm going to tell you right now, the first appeal, they're going to go, nope, sorry, we stand by our opinion. Because in insurance, the first appeal that you put in is reviewed by the people who denied it the first time. Are they going to change their minds magically because you wrote a paragraph? No. They're not going to. So then you ask for that appeal in writing, and that takes time. And by the way, you ask for continuation of services while you're appealing, right? That they don't take anything away from you. Then the second denial comes, and you appeal again. And in the second denial, unless you're in TRICARE, then it's reviewed by an independent group of people who don't work for your insurance company. I haven't experienced a single parent being denied on the second appeal, unless it's TRICARE, and then it takes the third appeal. So because they know and they've been sued for denial of access to care that is effective, and the studies are there that show it's effective. Now, insurance is mounting huge research studies to show that it isn't effective, but most of it is with people doing 10 and 15 hours. Yeah. Okay. And thank you, George, for caring about our children in the future, because we do too. We do too. And someday, George, I would love it for you to have a conversation with my son, so that you could see that I have not brainwashed him and that he's pretty A-okay. He's like the best person I know. I would like to be doing as well as he's doing. Do you have yes. So, but Anna, if you want the 6 seminal studies that I refer to all the time, just do me a favor and email me. And my email is shannon@autism-live.com, and I'm happy to forward them to you. And there have been more since then, but those are the 6 seminal ones, and everybody tells me they never need anything more than that. So there's my email on the screen, shannon@autism-live.com. Listen, I want to say that I love and respect all of you. And George, there is no one that I respect more than you. Listen, here's my thing. I fought so hard for my son to be able to express himself and his opinion. I want to tell you, I would be the last person in the world to tell you that your opinion is not valid. Your opinion is your opinion, George. I don't want to change your mind. I don't. I think that you sound like you're doing just fine, George. I think that you are worried about the parents that I'm talking to and about their kids. And I think that we can disagree. And I think that your viewpoint, the reason why I included it is that I think it's important for parents to hear that. I think it is a valid viewpoint, and I think it's a valid part of the discussion. We should never just hand over our kids and say, do whatever you want with our kids. Our kids always need to be uplifted and taught well. So I value you being a part of this conversation. And I think, I know you say that I'm not hearing you. I'll look at that, George, and I'm happy to have another conversation outside, because I do want to hear what you're saying. And I do think that bad things have happened. But I know from watching my son that he learned. He learned, and he is not having anything hold him back because he learned all kinds of things. And that has made all the difference. You know, I put the two roads diverged, and you know the Robert Frost poem about I'm going to paraphrase, but there were two pathways, and I chose the one less walked, and it has made all the difference. And that is true. Most parents don't choose to do early intensive behavioral intervention. But I chose to, and I'm happy with my decision. And I think my son is happy with the decisions that we made and that we included him in as soon as he had a method of stating what he wanted, which was early. I loved somebody said at the conference, we vote with our hands and our feet. And that kids have a way, even if they're not at the point when they can express themselves, you know, with sign or with, you know, texting or whatever, they express themselves. And we listen to him. I do want to say that for people whose kids are older, the research isn't there, so you're going to have to fight with the insurance company. But as I said in the beginning, ABA is effective for senior citizens, Olympic athletes, Fortune 500 companies. So we know that the teaching technique still works. Does it work to the point where somebody moves from being in a group where they cannot toilet to being a group one? Jury is out on that. But, you know, you can always, we all can grow. We all can learn things that can enrich our lives. So, but the intensity is, the argument is not going to be there for the intensity for the older age kids. You're going to have an uphill battle. And I would tell you to fight for as many hours as you could get and fill in everything that you can yourself. Make it an educationally enriched environment. That's what I mean when I say intensity, is it's an educationally enriched environment, not rigid. That's not what we're going for. All right, I love you all. I must go. But tomorrow we're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh live, where you can ask her questions and hear what she has to say about everything. And then on Wednesday, we're doing a special edition. I should check my phone because she was going to let me know. But I think that we're doing a special edition of Let's Talk All the Things with Rachel Bird, where we're going to be talking about following. She's got some recipes for you, and it's just a hilarious, fun hour. And then on Thursday, we're doing Let's Talk Movies with Moira. And then, of course, Stories from the Spectrum on Friday. That's all voices from the neurodiverse community. So we look forward to spending the week with you. I'm so glad to be back and be here with all of you. Much love to all of you. Thank you. Give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you, too. Bye-bye for now. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much. See you next time.